Picture this. Nigel Farage, the man who dragged Britain out of the European Union, who has survived plane crashes and milkshake attacks, who has built an entire political career on being the thorn in the establishment side, sits down to write a polite letter to the Prime Minister. He asks, quite reasonably, for his party to get some representation in the House of Lords. And what does he get in return? Absolutely nothing. Not a polite rejection. Not even a thanks but no thanks note. Complete radio silence. The political equivalent of being left on read. And now, Keir Starmer has just appointed 34 new peers to the House of Lords, handing out peerages like party favours at a political wedding. In Reform UK got precisely 0. Not one. Zilch. Nada. The fury is real, the gloves are off, and British politics just got a whole lot spicier. Quick favour, if you are loving this already, smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell. Over 94% of you brilliant viewers have not subscribed yet. It is completely free, takes literally 2 seconds, and genuinely means the world to us here at British Mirror. Cheers if you did. Right, let us dive into this constitutional drama. So here's what went down. Last night, Sir Keir Starmer confirmed 34 new appointments to the House of Lords. Now, for those unfamiliar with how our wonderfully archaic system works, the House of Lords is Britain's upper chamber, filled with appointed rather than elected members, where legislation gets scrutinized and occasionally blocked by people wearing ermine robes and fancy titles. It is democracy's weird older cousin who still lives in the attic and occasionally comes down to criticize your life choices. The Prime Minister gets to appoint new members, or peers, as we call them, and traditionally, this power gets used to reward loyal supporters, bring in experts, and maintain some semblance of political balance in the chamber. Keir Starmer just appointed 34 new peers in one go. That is not a small number. That is not a gentle adjustment to the chamber's composition. That is a full-scale stuffing operation. Of those 34 appointments, a whopping 25 went to Labour. 25. That is nearly 3/4 of all the new peers. The man is not even trying to be subtle about it. He is essentially turning the House of Lords into Labour's retirement home for favoured colleagues and political allies. It is a legislative equivalent of giving all your mates free lifetime gym memberships, except the gym is one of the most powerful legislative chambers in the country. Now, let us break down how these 34 peerages got divvied up, because the distribution is absolutely fascinating and reveals everything about Starmer's priorities. Labour gets 25. The Liberal Democrats, bless them, despite being considerably smaller party in terms of MPs and national vote share, get 5 new peers. 5. The Conservatives, who until recently were running the entire country, get 3. And Reform UK, the party that won 4 million votes at the last election and secured 5 members of Parliament, get absolutely nothing. 0. Naught. They have been completely frozen out. Let us put this in perspective for a moment. Reform UK won more votes at the last general election than the Liberal Democrats. They secured 5 parliamentary seats compared to the Lib Dem's considerably larger haul, granted, but the raw vote numbers tell a different story. 4 million British citizens voted for Reform UK. That is not a fringe movement. That is not a protest party operating in the margins. That is a significant chunk of the electorate who looked at all the available options and said, you know what? We will have what Farage is having. And yet, when it comes to representation in the House of Lords, they might as well not exist. The Liberal Democrats, who have been politically relevant for approximately 5 minutes every decade since the coalition government imploded, somehow managed to secure 5 new peerages. Now, do not get me wrong, I have nothing against the Lib Dems. They are perfectly nice people who make excellent bar charts and occasionally win by-elections in places nobody expected. But the idea that they deserve House of Lords representation whilst a party with 4 million votes gets completely ignored is, let us be honest, absolutely bonkers. Here is where the story gets properly juicy. Back in August, months before these appointments were announced, Nigel Farage actually wrote to Keir Starmer. He laid out a perfectly reasonable argument. Reform UK has representation in the House of Commons. They won significant public support, and it is fundamentally unfair that parties with fewer MPs than Reform have representation in the House of Lords whilst this party has none. It is not an unreasonable point. In fact, it is quite a sensible argument about democratic representation and fairness. Farage was not demanding dozens of peerages. He was simply asking for some representation. Basic acknowledgement that his party exists and represents a sizable chunk of the British public. And what response did he get from number 10? Absolutely nothing. Not a letter. Not an email. Not even a polite brush-off through a junior civil servant. Complete silence. Keir Starmer, who loves to talk about respect, fairness, and bringing the country together, could not even be bothered to send a reply. Farage got ghosted. The Prime Minister of the United Kingdom basically swiped left on Reform UK and pretended the conversation never happened. It is breathtakingly rude when you think about it. Whatever you think of Nigel Farage, and opinions vary wildly, he is a sitting member of Parliament representing a party with significant public support. A response should be the bare minimum of political courtesy. So when the peerage announcements came through last night, confirming what everyone already suspected, that Reform UK will be getting precisely nothing, Farage absolutely exploded. Taking to X, formerly Twitter, he let rip with both barrels. He wrote, "In the summer I wrote to Keir Starmer to ask that Reform have some representation in the House of Lords. He did not give me the courtesy of a response, despite Reform winning the elections in May. This makes me more determined to smash the political establishment than ever." Now, let us unpack that statement because every word is doing heavy lifting. First, Farage makes it clear he followed proper procedure. He wrote politely. He asked nicely. He played by the rules. This was not Farage being a provocateur or deliberately causing chaos. This was Farage trying to engage with the system in good faith. Second, he highlights the sheer disrespect of getting no response whatsoever, not even an acknowledgement. That is significant because it plays directly into Reform's narrative about being shut out by the establishment. Third, and most importantly, he says this makes him more determined to smash the political establishment than ever. That is not throwaway rhetoric. That is a declaration of war. Farage is essentially telling Starmer, "You wanted to ignore me? Fine. Watch what happens next." And this is where things get strategically interesting, because Keir Starmer has just handed Nigel Farage the single best recruitment tool imaginable. Every Reform supporter who was maybe wavering, who was thinking perhaps the party should moderate or work within the system, now has concrete evidence that the system will never accept them. Starmer has essentially validated everything Farage has been saying for years about the establishment closing ranks against outsiders. It is a political gift wrapped in ermine robes and tied with bow made of pure contempt. But let us talk about who actually did get these peerages, because the list is absolutely fascinating and reveals everything about how political patronage works in modern Britain. Keir Starmer appointed his former press chief, Matthew Doyle, to the House of Lords. His press chief, the man whose job was literally to make Starmer look good in the media, now gets a lifetime appointment to help scrutinize legislation. Rachel Reeves' former aide, Katie Martin, also made the cut. So did Richard Walker, the boss of Iceland Supermarkets, who just happened to back Labour during the election campaign. What a coincidence. Support Labour publicly, get a peerage. It is almost like there's a pattern here. Meanwhile, over on the Conservative side, Kimi Badenoch made some interesting choices with her 3 nominations. She put forward Sharon Davies, the former Olympic swimmer turned women's rights activist, which is actually quite a clever appointment given the ongoing debates around sex and gender. She also nominated Sir John Redwood, the veteran Conservative politician and Eurosceptic, and historian Simon Heffer. All 3 are interesting choices that bring specific expertise and perspectives to the Lords. The Conservatives, even in a diminished state, are thinking strategically about who they are sending to the upper chamber. The Liberal Democrats got 5 appointments, which for a party of their size is quite generous. It suggests that Starmer either respects the Lib Dems more than Reform, which is entirely possible, or that he sees them as useful potential allies for passing legislation. The Lib Dems historically have been willing to work with both major parties when it suits them, so having more Lib Dem peers could give Starmer more options for building coalitions on specific issues. But here's a really fascinating bit of context that often gets overlooked in these stories. Despite all these new Labour appointments, the Conservatives are still by far the largest party in the House of Lords. The Tories have had decades to pack the upper chamber with their supporters, and those peerages last for life. So even though Labour is now in government and frantically appointing new peers, they are still playing catch-up to decades of Conservative dominance in the Lords. This is actually the second major batch of Labour appointments since Starmer became Prime Minister. He appointed 30 back in December, 7 ministerial appointments before that, and now 25 more. That is 62 new Labour peers in total. It sounds like loads until you remember that David Cameron appointed 122 peers over just a 2-year period. Cameron was handing out peerages like they were promotional flyers outside a dodgy nightclub. A Labour source tried to justify the appointments by saying, the Tories stuffed the House of Lords, creating a serious imbalance that has allowed them to frustrate our plans and make working families better off. This needs to be corrected to deliver on our mandate from the British people. Which is political spin, for they did it first, so now we are doing it too, and somehow that makes it okay. It is a legislative equivalent of a child pointing at their sibling and saying, "But Mum, he started it." The Labour source also mentioned that the government will continue progressing their reform program, which includes removing hereditary peers from the House of Lords. Now, that is actually quite significant. Hereditary peers are people who inherited their seats in the Lords based purely on who their parents were. It is feudalism with better lighting. Getting rid of them has been discussed for decades, and if Labour actually follows through, it would represent genuine democratic progress. Of course, it is also convenient that removing hereditary peers, who tend to be conservative-leaning, would further shift the balance of the Lords in Labour's favour. Funny how constitutional reform always seems to benefit whoever is proposing it.